The alien students recoiled in horror, their almond eyes wide with shock, as the human's words sank in. Earth's history was soaked in the blood of constant warfare. Gabriel Hicks, a human historian and xenoanthropologist, didn't flinch as he stared out at 200 gasping Malon University students, each towering over his mere 6-foot frame. The Malons had foolishly believed humans were new to the stars, children taking their first steps into the galaxy. They were wrong. Gabriel clicked a button, bringing up a shimmering hologram of Earth. He watched the aliens recoil again as the blue-green orb was suddenly engulfed in strobing flashes of light, each flash a detonating nuclear warhead. Another click, and the hologram shifted, displaying city-sized formations of human soldiers marching across scarred battlefields, their weapons belching fire and smoke as they mowed down their enemies. So much death, so much destruction, all part of human existence for millennia. Gabriel locked eyes with Pryler. War may be devastating, but it's also been our greatest drive, a crucible that's forged unimaginable advancements and galactic expansion. Without it, without the incessant pressure to innovate and improve, we'd be nothing. The galaxy's victims rather than its inheritors. Gabriel paused, letting his words hang. Now, through violence, through sheer tenacity, we thrive while other civilizations that abstained from combat wither. The Malons haven't known war in 5,000 years. Think carefully on what that means. As Gabriel ended his lecture, he noticed the fear in those huge alien eyes morph into begrudging understanding, tinged with awe, and perhaps a shred of envy. He smiled. The Malons were finally beginning to grasp what humanity was, and what it was capable of. This was just the beginning of a rude awakening for the galaxy's other spacefaring civilizations. After the lecture, Gabriel strode through the university's sprawling campus, weaving between the towering iridescent metal buildings that gleamed under the alien sun. He ducked into a secluded courtyard, spotting Pryler already waiting for him on a sleek silver bench. Pryler's almond eyes were troubled as Gabriel approached. "I still can't believe it," the Malon said, shaking his head. "The sheer scale of human warfare. It's unfathomable. How can a species possibly survive, let alone thrive, under such brutal conditions?" Gabriel sat down beside him, the metal cool against his skin. He sensed an opportunity here, a chance to truly understand the Malon perspective. "Tell me, Pryler," he said gently, "what is your own species' history with conflict, with war?" Pryler's gaze turned distant. The Malon haven't engaged in any form of organized violence for over 5,000 years, not since the Great Awakening. A transformative period in our history, an era of spiritual and philosophical enlightenment that fundamentally changed Malon society. We turned our backs on our violent past, embracing peace and unity. Gabriel leaned forward, intrigued. "And what does your government say about humanity, about our history?" Pryler hesitated, then sighed. "The Council of Elders strictly controls all information about your species. They portray humans as primitive and barbaric, unworthy of contact with the wider galactic community." "And do you believe that? Do you think their stance is justified?" Conflict played out across Pryler's face. Gabriel could see the war between loyalty to his people and the glimmer of curiosity, of doubt. I have always been skeptical of the Council's claims," Pryler admitted softly, "and your lecture today has only deepened those doubts." Gabriel's heart raced with excitement. Here was a chance to truly bridge the gap between their civilizations, to foster real understanding. "Pryler," he said earnestly, "I want to share more with you about human history and culture, but I need to know that I can trust you to keep our conversations private. Can you do that?" Pryler stared at him, torn. Then slowly he nodded. "Yes, I can do that." As they rose and parted ways, Gabriel couldn't suppress his growing sense of excitement. This was the first step in breaking down the walls between humanity and the Malon, in forging a new path forward. But Pryler walked away with a heaviness in his chest, a creeping unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that his government was hiding something profound from the Malon people, that there were secrets lurking in the shadows of their society. Gabriel led Pryler into a decrepit warehouse on the edge of campus, the Malan's eyes wide as he ducked through the rusted metal door. Inside, a holographic projector hummed to life, casting shimmering images across the cracked concrete walls. "Somewhere we won't be disturbed," Gabriel replied, tapping at the projector's controls. "I want to show you more about Earth's military history, the unfiltered truth, not the sanitized version your government allows." Pryler nodded, a mix of anticipation and trepidation on his face as the first hologram materialized. A phalanx of Roman legionnaires marching in perfect unison, their shields locked and swords gleaming. Gabriel walked Pryler through the ages, from the thundering hooves of Mongol hordes to the cannon fire of Napoleonic wars, the trenches of World War I to the nuclear shadows of Hiroshima. But it was the Battle of Stalingrad that made Pryler's breath catch in his throat. The city was a ruined wasteland, shattered buildings and rubble-strewn streets lit by the muzzle flashes of rifles and machine guns. Soldiers grappled hand to hand, stabbing with bayonets, bludgeoning with rifle butts. The dead lay where they fell, frozen and forgotten in the Russian winter. "Over 1 million souls lost," Gabriel said softly, "in a battle that lasted 5 months. The Soviet forces were outnumbered, outgunned, but they held their ground. Inch by bloody inch, they turned the tide against the Germans, not through superior weapons or tactics, but through sheer will." Pryler stared at the flickering images, his face pale. How could they endure such horror, such violence? Gabriel was silent for a long moment, because they had to. Because some things are worth fighting for, even dying for. Their homes, their families, their very way of life. He turned to Pryler, his eyes intense. The Soviets at Stalingrad weren't just fighting for a city. They were fighting for the survival of their civilization. Pryler looked away, his mind reeling. All his life he'd been taught that peace was the highest ideal, that violence was a primitive aberration. But watching these humans wade through the very mouth of hell, seeing the iron resolve in their eyes, it shook him to his core. As the holograms faded and the projector powered down, Pryler felt a strange hollowness in his chest, a sense that, in the Malan's pursuit of tranquility, they had abandoned something primal and necessary, the capacity for sacrifice, for suffering, for clawing victory from the jaws of annihilation. In their next clandestine rendezvous, Gabriel and Pryler huddled over a flickering holotable, ancient tomes and modern datapads strewn before them. Gabriel tapped a weathered leather volume, its pages yellowed with age. "The Iliad," he said, his voice low, "one of the oldest war stories in human history. It's the tale of Achilles, the greatest of the Greek warriors at the siege of Troy." Pryler leaned in, his almond eyes widening as Gabriel recounted the epic. He listened enraptured as Gabriel spoke of Achilles' wrath, his unmatched prowess in battle, and his ultimate choice to embrace a glorious death over a long, unremarkable life. "Achilles knew his fate," Gabriel murmured. "He could have lived a safe, comfortable life, but he chose the path of the warrior. He chose to risk everything for honor and glory." Pryler's brow furrowed. But why? Why would he embrace death so readily? Gabriel smiled faintly. "For Achilles and for many human warriors throughout history, there are things worth more than life itself. Things like duty, loyalty, and the chance to be part of something greater." He tapped another book, a battered paperback. "All Quiet on the Western Front, a story of World War I, one of the bloodiest conflicts in our history. It's a testament to the bonds forged between soldiers in the trenches, the way war can strip away everything until all you have is the man next to you." Pryler flipped through the pages, his fingers tracing the words. Images flashed through his mind, mud-caked soldiers huddled in trenches, the deafening thunder of artillery, the screams of the dying. "I never imagined war could be like this," he whispered. "So personal, so visceral." Gabriel nodded, his eyes distant. "War changes people. It breaks them down and rebuilds them. For some, it's a crucible that forges unbreakable bonds. For others, it's a nightmare they can never wake from." He picked up a final book, its cover emblazoned with a stark black title, "The Things They Carried." This one is about a more recent war, Vietnam. It explores the physical and emotional burdens soldiers carry, the weight of memory and trauma. As Pryler read, he felt a growing sense of unease. The stories spoke of men who found purpose and meaning in war, even as it tore them apart. Men who willingly plunged into the depths of hell for their comrades, who endured unimaginable horrors because they believed in something greater than themselves. "Is this what we've lost?" Pryler asked, his voice barely a whisper. "This capacity for sacrifice, for endurance in the face of suffering?" Gabriel closed the books, his gaze heavy. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I do know that for humans war has been a crucible, a forge that has shaped our very identity. We are who we are because of the battles we've fought, the sacrifices we've made." Pryler sat back, his mind reeling. He had always believed that peace was the highest aspiration, that conflict was a primitive relic to be discarded. But now, confronted with the raw reality of human warfare, he found himself questioning everything he thought he knew. He looked at Gabriel, at the hardness in the human's eyes, and felt a chill run down his spine. For the first time he began to understand the true depth of the chasm between their species, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the Malon were standing on the edge of an abyss, blissfully unaware of the darkness that lurked below. In the dim light of their hidden meeting place, Gabriel reached into his satchel and pulled out a small metallic cube. With a flick of his wrist, the cube expanded into a shimmering holographic display. Pryler leaned in, his eyes widening as the image of a grizzled human soldier flickered to life before them. "This is my grandfather," Gabriel said softly. "He fought in the Second Korean War back in the late 21st century. The hologram showed the soldier standing tall and proud, his uniform crisp and his eyes hard. Behind him, Pryler could see the hulking shapes of advanced military vehicles and the glint of high-tech weaponry. Gabriel swiped his hand and the image changed. Now the soldier was surrounded by his comrades, their faces drawn and haunted. "He never talked much about what he saw over there," Gabriel murmured, "but I could tell it weighed on him. The nightmares, the long silences, the anger." Pryler watched as the hologram shifted again, showing the soldier in later life. His hair had gone grey, his face lined with age and sorrow. "The war never really left him," Gabriel said. "It affected everything. His marriage, his relationship with my dad. It was like a part of him got stuck over there, and he could never quite find his way back." As the hologram faded, Gabriel turned to Pryler, his eyes distant. "I served too, you know. In the Centauri conflict back in the 30s, it was intense. The bond you form with your squad, the sense of purpose, it's like nothing else." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But coming home, that was harder than any firefight. Suddenly, all that camaraderie, that sense of meaning, it was gone. And the people back here, they couldn't understand, didn't want to." Pryler sat in silence, absorbing Gabriel's words. He had always thought of war as a distant, abstract concept, something that happened to other species, in other times. But listening to Gabriel, hearing the pain and the pride in his voice, it made it real in a way Pryler had never experienced. He looked at Gabriel with new eyes, seeing not just a human but a warrior, a living testament to the trials and triumphs of his species. And in that moment, Pryler realized just how little he truly understood about the forces that had shaped human history and culture. As they sat there in the shadows, the weight of Gabriel's revelations hanging between them, Pryler felt a creeping sense of unease. The Malon had always dismissed humanity as primitive, dangerous. But what if they were wrong? What if, in their rush to condemn human violence, they had overlooked the very qualities that made them so resilient? Pryler's mind raced with questions, with doubts. He had always trusted in the wisdom of the Council, in the superiority of Malon ways. But now, faced with the raw, unvarnished truth of human experience, he couldn't help but wonder if his people had been missing something vital all along. Gabriel led Pryler through the labyrinthine corridors of the secure facility, the Malon's eyes widening with each twist and turn. They stopped before a reinforced door, Gabriel placing his hand on a biometric scanner. The door hissed open, revealing a brightly lit chamber filled with gleaming displays and strange devices. "Welcome," Gabriel said, "to the Adaptive Technologies Lab." Pryler stepped inside, his gaze darting from one marvel to the next. Gabriel guided him to a sleek pedestal, upon which rested a small, unassuming canister. "This," Gabriel said, picking up the device, "is Medigel, a battlefield miracle worker." He twisted the canister, and a translucent gel oozed from the nozzle onto his palm. Nanites suspended in a protein matrix, accelerates healing, prevents infection, stops bleeding in seconds. Pryler watched, astonished, as Gabriel smeared the gel across a small cut on his hand. The wound sealed itself before his eyes, leaving unblemished skin. "Incredible," Pryler breathed. "And this came from your wars?" Gabriel nodded. "Necessity breeds innovation. When you're bleeding out on some distant rock, you can't wait for a medic." He led Pryler to another display, picking up a small earpiece. "The Translang," he explained, fitting the device into his ear. "Real-time translation of any known language." Gabriel tapped the earpiece, then spoke in a guttural alien tongue. Pryler startled as the words emerged in perfect Malon from a tiny speaker. "A tool of war?" Pryler asked. "Originally, yes, intercepting enemy comms, coordinating with allies, but now, breaking down barriers between worlds." They moved from one wonder to the next, satellite images that could read a license plate from orbit, polymers stronger than steel, yet light as a feather, each a testament to human ingenuity, born from the crucible of conflict. But as they walked, Gabriel's tone grew somber. "It's not all miracles," he said, gesturing to a darkened alcove. Within stood a menacing humanoid shape, all gleaming metal and cold angles. "An autonomous combat drone," Gabriel explained. "A soldier that never sleeps, never fears, never questions orders." Pryler felt a chill run down his spine. "You created warriors without souls?" They left the facility in silence, each lost in thought. Pryler's mind reeled with the implications of what he'd seen, the marvels, the horrors, all springing from the same wellspring. Could it be, he wondered, that the Malon's centuries of peace had stifled their growth, that without the spur of conflict they had stagnated, while the humans had soared? It was a troubling thought, one that would gnaw at him in the days to come. Pryler's mind churned as he stormed out of Xyloth's office, the elder's dismissive words echoing in his skull. He stalked through the university's gleaming halls, his fists clenched, his heart hammering against his ribs. How could Xyloth be so blind, so unwilling to even consider the evidence Pryler had presented? He found himself in the secluded courtyard where he and Gabriel often met, the human's revelations still fresh in his mind. The battles, the sacrifices, the relentless drive to innovate and survive. It painted a picture of humanity that was so much more complex, so much more nuanced than the crude caricature peddled by the Council. Pryler sank onto a bench, his head in his hands. He couldn't unsee what Gabriel had shown him, couldn't go back to accepting the comfortable lies he'd been fed all his life. But what could one Malon student do against the entrenched power of the Council? A hand clasped his shoulder, startling him from his thoughts. He looked up to see Naira, a fellow student he'd often seen in Gabriel's lectures. Her almond eyes were bright with curiosity and concern. "Pryler, are you all right?" she asked, her voice low. He hesitated, then shook his head. No, I'm not. Naira, what do you know about humans, about their history?" She glanced around, then sat beside him, leaning close. "Only what the Council allows. But I've always suspected there's more to the story. The way they restrict information, the way they shut down any questions. It doesn't add up." Pryler felt a surge of excitement, of hope. What if I told you there was a way to learn the truth, to see humanity as they really are, not as the Council portrays them? Naira's eyes widened. I'd say I want to know more." Over the next few weeks, Pryler and Naira began to reach out to other students, to young scholars and intellectuals who shared their doubts about the official narrative. They met in secret, in abandoned classrooms and forgotten corners of the campus, sharing the knowledge Gabriel had imparted. They pored over ancient human texts, marveled at holographic records of Earth's bloody history. They debated the ethics of warfare, the price of progress, the resilience of the human spirit. And slowly, steadily, their numbers grew. But as their secret society took root, Pryler began to notice a change in the atmosphere on campus. Security drones hovered in once empty corridors, their camera eyes tracking his every move. His personal data pad flickered with strange glitches, as if someone was trying to access his files. And more than once he caught sight of grim-faced elders watching him from the shadows. He knew they were being monitored, knew that the council was tightening its grip. But he couldn't stop, not now. Not when so many Malons were waking up to the truth, questioning the very foundations of their society. In a dingy safe house on the outskirts of the city, Pryler huddled with his fellow dissidents, their faces lit by the glow of data screens. They were analyzing a leaked document, a classified report on a long-range probe that had detected signs of an advanced civilization in a nearby star system, a civilization that the Council had known about for decades, but had kept hidden from the Malon people. "They've been lying to us," Pryler said, his voice shaking with anger. "Lying about humanity, lying about what's out there. We have to expose this, have to make the people see." The door burst open, silencing him mid-sentence. A dozen armed guards poured into the room, their weapons trained on the stunned dissidents, and behind them, his face a mask of cold fury, stood Xyloth. "Pryler," the elder said, his voice dripping with disdain, "you have been warned. The Council's word is law, and you have chosen to defy it. You and your collaborators will be dealt with accordingly." As the guards closed in, Pryler felt a flicker of fear, of doubt. Had he gone too far? Had he doomed them all with his relentless pursuit of truth? But then he thought of Gabriel, of the indomitable human spirit he embodied, and he knew with a sudden clarity that there could be no turning back. No matter the cost, the Malon people deserved to know the truth about their universe and their place within it. Gabriel paced his cramped university quarters, his mind racing with the implications of Pryler's arrest. The Malon government was tightening its grip, determined to crush any dissent. A sudden knock at the door made Gabriel freeze. He crept to the door, his hand hovering over the release button. "Who's there?" "Professor Hicks, my name is Corzan. I'm here to help." Gabriel hesitated, then opened the door. A tall Malon in a crisp military uniform stepped inside, his almond eyes darting around the room. "We don't have much time," Corzan said, his voice low and urgent. "Xyloth and his hardliners are moving against you and Prylar's followers. They mean to purge all human influence from our society." Gabriel's blood ran cold. "What are they planning?" "Mass arrests, seizure of all human tech and artifacts, and your immediate expulsion from Malon space." "Why are you telling me this?" Corzan's jaw tightened. "Because I believe Xyloth is wrong. His isolationism will doom the Malon to stagnation and decline. We need to engage with humanity, not shut ourselves off from the galaxy. I can get you and Pryler's inner circle off-world. There's a secret spaceport on the city outskirts, with a fast ship prepped for launch. It'll take you to a neutral trading post beyond Malon space." Gabriel was already grabbing datapads and holodisks, stuffing them into a satchel. "Pryler's research, my lectures, the historical archives, it's a start." "You'll need to move fast. Xyloth's forces will be hunting you." They slipped out into the night, Corzan leading Gabriel through shadowed alleys and deserted courtyards. The city was a labyrinth of towering metal spires and pulsing energy conduits, but Corzan navigated it with the ease of long familiarity. Suddenly the whine of repulsor craft filled the air. Searchlights stabbed down from above, seeking, probing. Corzan cursed under his breath, dragging Gabriel into the shadow of a massive generator complex. Xyloth's security forces. They're locking down the city. Gabriel's heart pounded as he peered around the corner. Armored transports hovered over the streets, disgorging squads of heavily armed Malon soldiers. They fanned out, energy rifles at the ready, scanning the darkened buildings with cold precision. "We'll have to take the maintenance tunnels," Corzan whispered, prying open a rusted access hatch. They dropped down into a narrow, dimly lit corridor that stretched out beneath the city. The air was thick with the stench of ozone and decay. They ran, their footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Behind them, the sound of booted feet and barked orders grew louder. Corzan led them through a dizzying warren of tunnels and junctions, always staying one step ahead of their pursuers. Finally, they emerged into the open air, on the outskirts of a sprawling spaceport complex. A sleek, angular ship waited on a secluded landing pad, its engines already thrumming with power. But as they sprinted towards the ship, a blast of energy sizzled past Gabriel's head. He spun to see Xyloth striding towards them, flanked by a dozen heavily armed soldiers. Corzan stepped forward, his hand on his sidearm. "Stand down, Xyloth. You're on the wrong side of history." Xyloth sneered. "History will remember me as the savior of the Malon, the one who protected our purity from human corruption." As the two Malons faced off, Gabriel saw Prylar and a handful of other dissidents sprinting from the shadows, racing towards the waiting ship. "Gabriel, come on!" Prylar shouted, waving him forward. With a final nod of gratitude, Gabriel turned and ran, leaping aboard the ship just as its hatch slammed shut. He stumbled into the cockpit, joining Prylar and the other refugees as they strapped into acceleration couches. Through the viewports, he could see Corzan and Xyloth locked in a tense standoff, energy weapons drawn. Then the ship's engines roared to life, and the spaceport fell away beneath them, the figures on the ground dwindling to toy-like specks. As they blasted out of Malon's atmosphere and into the star-flecked void, Gabriel felt a strange mix of elation and trepidation. They had escaped, but their fight was just beginning. The dossier in his satchel was their only hope of convincing the wider Malon society of the need for change. Prylar gripped his hand, his eyes alive with a fierce determination. "We'll make them see, Gabriel. We'll open their eyes to the truth, no matter the cost." Gabriel nodded, staring out at the infinite expanse of space. Somewhere out there were allies waiting to be found, minds waiting to be changed. The road ahead would be long and perilous, but he knew, with unshakable certainty, that they would see their mission through to the end. As the sleek ship carrying Gabriel, Prylar, and their allies docked at Nexus Prime, they stepped out into a cacophony of noise and activity. The sprawling space station teemed with life, a dizzying array of alien species, haggling, bartering, and hurrying about their business. Towering holograms flickered with advertisements and news feeds, while the acrid scent of fuel and exotic spices hung heavy in the recycled air. Gabriel pulled up the hood of his cloak, scanning the crowd warily. "Stay close," he murmured to Prylar. "We can't afford to draw attention." They wove through the throngs of traders and travelers, trying to blend in. But Gabriel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His hand drifted to the pulse pistol concealed beneath his cloak, a reassuring weight against his hip. Suddenly, a figure detached itself from the shadows of a nearby alcove. It was a tall, lithe alien with reddish skin and piercing silver eyes. "Gabriel Hicks, Prylar of the Malon?" the figure asked, its voice low and urgent. Gabriel tensed, his fingers tightening on his weapon. "Who wants to know?" The alien glanced around, then leaned in closer. "My name is Raxon. I represent the Galactic Sentinels. We need to talk." Prylar shot Gabriel a questioning look, but Gabriel kept his eyes locked on Raxon. "And why should we trust you?" Raxon's thin lips curved into a smile. "Because we've been monitoring your situation on Malon. We know about Xyloth's hardliners, their plans for purging human influence, and we want to help." "Help how?" Prylar asked, his voice tight with suspicion. "The Sentinels have resources, connections. We can provide safe passage back to Earth, as well as support for your efforts to foster understanding between humans and Malon." Gabriel frowned. It sounded too good to be true. "And what's in it for you?" Raxon's silver eyes glittered. "Information. The data you've gathered on human history, culture, technology. It's invaluable to our cause." Gabriel exchanged a long look with Prylar. They were out of options, their funds dwindling and Xyloth's forces closing in. If the Sentinels were offering a way out— "Fine," Gabriel said at last, his jaw tight. "We'll share our data, but if you double-cross us—" Raxon raised his hands in a placating gesture. "You have my word, Gabriel Hicks. The Sentinels always honor our agreements." With little choice, they followed Raxon through the winding corridors of Nexus Prime, eventually arriving at a nondescript shuttle bay. A sleek, black ship awaited them, its hull unmarked save for a subtle emblem, a stylized eye within a circle. "Your chariot awaits," Raxon said, gesturing to the open airlock. "It's a long journey to Earth, but you'll have every comfort." As they boarded the ship and strapped into the acceleration couches, Gabriel couldn't quell the unease churning in his gut. They were placing a lot of trust in these mysterious Sentinels. The ship shuddered as it detached from Nexus Prime, the stars blurring into streaks of light as they hurtled into the void. Gabriel leaned back, feeling the weight of exhaustion tug at his eyelids. Pryla reached over, gripping his hand. "We're going to make it through this, Gabriel, together." Gabriel managed a tired smile, squeezing Pryla's fingers. Whatever challenges lay ahead, at least they weren't alone. Alarms blared, jolting Gabriel from a fitful sleep. He lurched upright, adrenaline surging through his veins. "What's happening?" he shouted over the cacophony. Raxon's voice crackled over the intercom, taut with tension. "Mercenary ships incoming. Xyloth must have hired them to intercept us." Gabriel swore, staggering to the cockpit on unsteady legs. Through the view screen he could see the angular silhouettes of the mercenary vessels, their hulls bristling with weaponry. "Can we outrun them?" Pryla asked, fear etched into his features. Raxon shook his head grimly. "Not a chance, we'll have to fight." Gabriel slid into the co-pilot's seat, his hands flying over the unfamiliar controls. He'd had some combat pilot training back in the service, but it had been years. Gritting his teeth, he focused on bringing the ship's shields online and arming the pulse cannons. The mercenaries closed in, their ship splitting into a classic pincer formation. Raxon wrenched the controls, sending their vessel into a dizzying roll. Pulse beams sizzled past the view screen, barely missing the hull. Gabriel returned fire, the cannons thrumming as they spat bolts of searing energy. One of the mercenary ships veered away, trailing smoke and debris. "Nice shot," Raxon called, but there was no time for celebration. The remaining ships pressed their attack, hammering at the Sentinel craft with a relentless barrage. With a final desperate salvo, the last mercenary ship exploded into a bloom of fire and shrapnel. Gabriel sagged back into his seat, his heart pounding. "Is everyone all right?" he asked hoarsely. Pryla nodded, his face pale but determined. "We're fine, but the ship took a beating." Raxon frowned at the readouts scrolling across his display. "Main engines are down, and we've got a leak in the life support systems. We'll need to set down for repairs." Gabriel rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the rasp of stubble. So much for a smooth trip home. But even as he said it, he knew they couldn't afford to dwell on the setbacks. Earth was still waiting, along with the promise of a new beginning for both their species. They had to keep pushing forward, no matter the cost. The urgent chime of an incoming transmission jolted Gabriel and Pryla from their thoughts as they approached Earth's shimmering blue crescent. Gabriel's heart raced as Corzin's face, etched with tension, flickered onto the screen. Gabriel slammed his fist against the console, a cold knot of dread tightening in his gut. He exchanged a loaded glance with Pryla, the Malone's almond eyes mirroring his own growing horror. "If we bring this knowledge back to Earth," Pryla said slowly, "it could give your people an edge in any conflict with the Malone. But, Gabriel, it could also push our species to the brink of war." Gabriel squeezed his eyes shut, the weight of the choice bearing down on him like a physical force. The information they carried could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy, but at what cost? How many lives would be lost in the conflagration that followed? "We can't let that happen," Gabriel said, his voice rough with emotion. "We can't be the spark that ignites an interstellar war." Pryla nodded, his jaw set. "Then we have only one path forward. We have to destroy the data, and ourselves with it." Gabriel felt a leaden certainty settle over him. It was the only way to ensure the fragile peace they had fought for would endure. With trembling hands, he brought up the ship's self-destruct sequence on the screen. "We need to record a message first," he said, his throat tight. "For our loved ones, for our people. They need to understand why we're doing this." They worked in silence, pouring their hearts into a final plea for understanding and reconciliation. Gabriel thought of his family, of the students he had mentored, of the dream of a universe where humans and Malon could coexist. Beside him, Pryla's voice shook as he spoke of his own hopes and fears, of the courage he had found in Gabriel's friendship. As they finished the recording, the proximity alarms blared, heralding the arrival of Xyloth's warships. The sleek Malon cruisers encircled them, weapons bristling and primed. Gabriel's hand hovered over the self-destruct control, his heart hammering. "Pryla," he said, his voice cracking, "it's been an honor." The Malon clasped his hand, his grip fierce and unwavering. "The honor was mine, Gabriel Hicks. In another life, perhaps." Gabriel nodded, blinking back the sting of tears. Then, with a final shared breath, he initiated the sequence. Their tiny ship, dwarfed by the Malon fleet, surged forward on a collision course with the lead cruiser. Xyloth's ships opened fire, lances of searing energy ripping through the void, but it was too late. Gabriel and Pryla's vessel slammed into the heart of the Malone formation, and the universe erupted in light. A massive shockwave of expanding gases and debris rippled outwards, engulfing the Malon ships in a maelstrom of destruction. The cruisers crumpled like tin cans, their hulls shattering under the immense forces unleashed. Escape pods and shattered debris spun away into the void, the only remnants of the once proud fleet. On Earth, in the gleaming headquarters of the Galactic Sentinels, a hush fell over the command center as Gabriel and Pryla's final message played out across the screens. Tears streamed down the faces of hardened operatives as the weight of the two men's sacrifice hit home. The news spread like wildfire, racing across the planet in a matter of minutes. In city squares and living rooms, in government halls and military bases, people watched in stunned silence as the recordings of Gabriel and Pryla's final moments played out again and again. Their words, their courage in the face of annihilation, struck a chord deep in the human psyche. The revelation of how close they had come to war with the Malon, of the price that had been paid to avert it, sent shockwaves through every level of society. In the halls of power, heated debates raged long into the night. Some called for retribution against the Malon, for a preemptive strike to eliminate the threat once and for all. But others, moved by Gabriel and Pryla's final plea, argued passionately for restraint and diplomacy. In the end, it was the latter voice that won out. The United Earth government, in a historic declaration, announced its intention to seek a peaceful resolution with the Malon, to honor the sacrifice of the two men who had given everything to prevent war. Emissaries were dispatched to the Malon homeworld, bearing messages of condolence and offers of truce. The new Malon leadership, shaken by the loss of Xyloth and his fleet, and moved by the recordings of Gabriel and Pryla's final moments, agreed to come to the table. In a neutral star system, far from the worlds of either species, human and Malon diplomats met for the first time in generations. The talks were tense and fraught, weighed down by centuries of mistrust and misunderstanding. But slowly, painfully, progress was made. Agreements were hammered out, concessions granted on both sides. A framework for peace, for cultural exchange and scientific cooperation began to take shape. Both species knew that true understanding would take time, that the scars of the past could not be erased overnight, but as the negotiations concluded and the delegates prepared to return to their respective homeworlds, a sense of cautious hope hung in the air. On Earth, in a solemn ceremony attended by millions, a monument was unveiled in the heart of the capital. Two figures, one human, one Malon, stood hand in hand, their faces lifted to the stars. The inscription below read, "In memory of Dr. Gabriel Hicks and Pryla of the Malon, whose courage and sacrifice brought light to the darkness and hope to the stars." Let their legacy endure as a beacon for all who seek the path of peace. As the memorial's eternal flame flickered to life, casting its glow across the silent crowd, a sense of shared purpose seemed to settle over the assembled masses. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but in that moment, anything seemed possible. Gabriel and Pryla's story would be told and retold in the years to come, a reminder of the heights to which sentient beings could rise and the depths of the connections they could forge. In the light of their sacrifice, a new era dawned, full of promise and potential. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.